Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm Patrick. I'm chairperson of PYCON Italy. We organize PYCON Italy every year. And also I'm a full stack developer at Sync Studios, which is a web agency. And we do mainly stuff for clients, but we also have internal products, so we can try and experiment new stuff. And yeah, if you can find me on Twitter or any social network with Patrick91. And so yeah, today I'm going to talk about GraphQL, which is new technology. But before that, let me talk about first the modern web. So we have seen the evolution of the web, from just small documents, we had a single server and we had a list of pages, which were mostly static. But yeah, with the web 3.0 or just the evolution of the web in general, you're starting to have more complex websites that were running on your phone, on your smartwatch, on your desktop, and even on the fridge, in the future probably already. So yeah, one of the core feature or technologies, if you want to say it like that, it's REST, which is basically the most common way to do data exchange between a server and a client, or a server and application, and so on, even between more than one server. But there are some issues with REST API. One of the most important issues is that you have too many API calls. For example, if you have an API like this, so you can get a user with ID 1, and you get something like that. So you get the username, for example, publishing a list of friends, which is another URL to another endpoint, and then you get the avatar, for example. But imagine that you're doing an application where you have to show the list of friends. Then you need to do another query for each user, which is not ideal, because you are doing too many requests. And also, especially for low bandwidth areas, or even if you're offline, you cannot do too many requests. So an alternative would be to create another endpoint where you can get the user with the list of friends expanded like this, for example. So you get the username array with friends with their names and so on, and you get the avatar. But then you need also the avatar, you need the URL of the avatar, so you do want to do another request, and then you do another endpoint. And then you need something different, because you're doing a mobile application, you only need the user and the image, for example. You need the small images because you're doing an application for mobile phones, so on. So you get situation like this, which is not ideal, because if you're doing a big project, then there is loads of endpoints, and it's really hard to change something without breaking stuff. And yeah, another solution would be to, for example, to have a fat endpoint. For example, for the user, you get everything back, but then you have too much data, which again is a waste, especially if you're doing a mobile application or an application for yeah. So you get something like this, which is, yes, it's not really readable, and especially, you're wasting bandwidth if you're not using all those data. So yeah, you're sending garbage, basically. Can we do better? Some of these issues you can solve with classic REST, or, REST is not really a specification, it's just a set of guidelines. So there is much free space, you can do whatever you want with it. Especially, what I showed you before, this is not really REST, because you should have a real endpoint. This is not each resources for each endpoint. But I think we can extend REST, but the problem is that it's not easy to really extend. For example, if you want to do one single endpoint, that you want to return, for example, the user and the friend's name, you can have something in the query parameter, but it's not the best solution. Especially because, trying to hack around something that's been for years, it's not really the best solution. So sometimes better to start from scratch. And yeah, this is one of the core tenets of GraphQL. Basically, it's a new language that has been created by Facebook in 2012, and it's been released as open source in 2015. And I think a couple of weeks ago, months, I don't remember, it's also under the Web API, Open API license, so you can use it without any issue of patents and stuff. So Facebook describes GraphQL as a query language where you can specify the requirements and interaction for your data. And this really means that you can do something like this. You can send a document, which is kind of like JSON, but without the values. So you can, for example, in this case, you can ask for the user, the name, the email, and the friend's name. And you get something like this. So you get, basically, it's the same document with the data. And another feature which is really important is types, which is something that you don't have in REST, for example. I mean, you can have types, but you still have to do like a different documentation. But types is built in. So for example, for the previous API that we've seen, we have a type that it's user, where you have a name, email, which are string and are required, and then a list of friends, which is also required. And also you have introspection. Basically, every GraphQL API exposes the schema, so you can get the information about the schema without like digging into the code. You can actually get it, something like this. So you can use an ID like GraphQL, where you can get, like, we can just type and it's going to autocomplete for you, and you also get documentation. I'm going to show an example in a few minutes. Also, you have different types of operation, because right now we only talked about like querying data, but you can also, of course, modify data on the server. So yeah, as I said, one of the operations is query. So it's the GraphQL way to get data from a server. Then you have mutation, which is the way that you can do side effects. So you can, for example, get a new user, answer a question, a poll, and so on. And you also have subscription, which is basically, it's like a query, but it's real time. So you can subscribe to a query and you can get the updates in real time. And also probably there are going to be more operation in the future, because it's a specification that's now like done. It can be improved. So how do you do a GraphQL query or just generic operation? So this is a basic query. So you can, as I showed you before, you can specify the fields that you want to have, like for example human. And you can also pass some arguments, which is quite cool, because you can change the output without doing any complex stuff. So in this case, for example, we are getting the human with ID 1000, a name, its name, and the height, but in foot. And this is like sample query, and this is the short-term notation. Usually, operation is actually like this. So you have the operation type first, an operation name, because since you don't have any endpoints, you need a way to like debug this stuff on the backend. So the operation name is for this. It's just for debugging. So basically, you have a name that you can find in the logs. And that's, you have a variable definition. Basically, every query that you have can accept or not some variables. So basically, you have like a query which is always like that. You can, for example, in the front end, or when you're doing the query, you can pass the variables, so you don't have to encode them inside the query. And you have the document side. And something that I want to note, GraphQL is a specification, and the fact that we use it for API, for web APIs, is not like built in, it's just an implementation of this specification. And the implementation, the standard implementation in HTTP is basically this. There is only one endpoint, so all your query is going to be on /GraphQL. It can be anything, but usually it's GraphQL. And it's going to be a post, so you don't have get request, delete, or any other stuff. You only have post. But yeah, this is a conference on Python. So how do you use this with Python? There is an amazing library which is called Graphene, and I'm quite happy because like a few days ago, version 2 has been released, which is a bit better. It's much nicer, and it's also easier to contribute because the code was a bit complex to use before. So you use something like this. So you import the library. You create a query, which is basically your list of fields that you have in your API. For example, we have a query right now which is only one field, which is a string. It's called hello, and then you create a resolver function for each of those queries or those fields. In this case, it's going to only return a word. Then you create the schema with the query, and then you can. This is just an example. You can execute the schema like this, but usually you do use the front-end library or library for, I don't know, Android and iOS. And also you can use this with Django. There is integration which is made ad hoc for Django. I think there is also for Flask and other libraries, but I use Django a lot, so this is my focus. To use with Django, you can install it, then you can add to the stolen apps, and you specify the main schema of your application, and then you add the GraphQL view to the API, to your URLs. And then you can use the built-in types for example, to expose your models on a GraphQL query. For example, in this case, we are creating a type which is ingredient, which is based on the model ingredient. And then we create a query which has got all the ingredients, which is a list of ingredients. And then you can resolve all the ingredients, and you create the schema like this. Also, I made the integration with the Django REST framework. So, for example, if you are using Django REST framework, you can basically use your serializer for mutation. It's only mutation because for the query you can just use standard Django models. I'm going to show an example before going into the details of this stuff. So I made a quick application with IO HTTP, which is going to basically create a basic schema, and we can test it with the IDE that's built in with GraphQL. Okay. So by default, you don't have anything. So as I said, you can do introspection. So when you create a query, you can do control space and you get all the fields on your query. And also you have the documentation on the right. For example, we have all questions, which is another field, which has got text, for example. And in this case, for example, you can see there is the list of questions. Maybe let me make this bigger. So basically you get only what you need. And also you can do, as I said, mutation. For example, if you want to answer a question, we can do it like this. You can pass the ID, which is going to be 1, 2, and the answer. And then we can get the fields for each mutation. Basically, a mutation is like a query, but you can also send arguments, and you get back data, but only the data that you want. You don't have to get everything. So in this case, I play it, and it says, okay, it's false, because the answer is 42. So, yeah. That's true. And also, something that's has been released with Graphene 2 is subscription. So basically, you can subscribe to an endpoint, to a query, and you can get all the information real time. This is doing a search, real-time search on Twitter, so I'm not sure what it's going to show. But, let's see. Yeah. So as you can see, it's quite fast because I just use hello as a search. But yeah, this is using WebSocket, and it's real time. And also you can, as I said, you can do everything that you can do with query. You can also get the username, and it changes. It's going to show the username, so it's quite cool. And you can also do other stuff. You can also filter and can add arguments and so on. I can show you the code, which is quite. So yeah, the schema is like this. It's basically using Graphene to pass the query mutations subscription, but you don't need to have everything. You can just have query or just mutation. Let me show the query first. So the query is just a type which has got all question, and another field which is basically returning an error, because I want to show you something later. Then the question is just a list where you can pass a language, which is the argument, and then you have a resolver for each of them. In this case, yeah, if the language is not known, I'm gonna throw an error because I didn't have time to write the translation. So now I return a question, which is basically just an object, a type with a text, string. And then there is the other field which is just returning an error. Then the mutation. Mutation again is just a list of fields. So you have a mutation which has the answer question field, which is basically another type, but the difference is that it's extending mutation and you can add arguments. So arguments is your input. And you also have the outputs like this. And there is only OK right now. And then you have a mutation function, which basically you can do your changes on the server. And for the subscription, it's more or less similar, but you use async IO for like doing stuff asynchronously. Otherwise, it's gonna block. Maybe I can, if I have time, some later I can show you this part, which is a bit more complex. I wanted to show you that you can also, for example, you can batch queries. So, for example, if I have a page where I need to get 10 different documents, I can batch everything. For example, in this case, I'm going to get the question language Italian, all the question, and this other field, which is just throws an error. And you basically get the data here. As you can see, there are some fields that are null because the code throws an error. But with GraphQL, you don't have HTTP errors anymore. Because since it's not like using really HTTP stuff, you don't have HTTP errors anymore, so you don't. The GraphQL endpoint usually returns only 200, which is something I don't really like, especially because if you have a bug and you need to be aware of this stuff, because otherwise it's not like showing the logs, you have to log it manually. But you get the errors in a different field of your response, so you can see that the IT and the ithrow errors is returning an error in this case, but you still get the data. For example, if you have something like you have a big complex query, it's nice because you can still show the data does not fail to the user instead of like just throwing a generic error for all this time. Since this is a new API, also we need to be aware of security implication. So the first one, I'm following quite actively the repo on GitHub, and the most frequent asked question is the authentication. There is nothing built in GraphQL. You can use standard HTTP stuff, so you can use basic code, you can use JWT tokens, so you can use session authentication. What I last done for a project is session, but also tried with JWT. It's not really hard. There are two ways that you can do this. You can basically have an argument on your query where you can pass the token, or you can just use standard headers, which is probably the easiest way, because otherwise you have to pass the token every time. And also permissions. So you don't have routes anymore, so you don't really have like views and stuff where you can add decorators or permissions anyway. Solution, you can basically, instead of having permissions on action and stuff, you can have permission on fields, which basically everything in GraphQL is a field, annotation is a field, so you can, for example, say user with this permission can only access this field and so on. This is something that I think GitHub is doing. GitHub is using GraphQL in production. It's also using GraphQL for the internal API, which is basically shared between the user available API and their internal. So basically they mark some field as private, so you cannot use it. It can only be used by GitHub internal. It's not even showing in the documentation. And also they have fields where it can only be used if you're logged in without passing, just using the header. And also something that it's also a problem. You can have long queries because you are giving much control to the actual user that's doing the query for the front end or for your application. So, for example, you can craft a query which can be really, really big. because you can nest fields. For example, if you have a user and the friend is a user, then you can go many levels deep. So you can do, for example, like 10 or even 100 levels on nesting, which is probably not ideal because it's gonna take loads of time. So one of the solution, I think it's done by Facebook. It's just to limit each query to 1 second. So if the query is taking more than 1 second, they just drop it and return an error to the user, which makes sense. But you can also, for example, count the number of nesting. So you can say, oh, if there is more than 3 levels of nesting, you just don't do the query because it's probably too much. And something that GitHub is doing, which is similar to counting the levels of nesting, is basically it's calculating a cost. So they like a small algorithm to calculate how much a query costs. For example, in this case, you're getting the first 50 repo from GitHub and the first 10 issues from each repo. So the cost is something like this: 50 plus 50 times 10, and the cost is 550, which is probably it's quite low, but still, since GitHub is releasing this as the API can be used by everyone, they don't have control on the queries, so they need some sort of way to limit the usage of the API. Like with HTTP, you could count the number of requests, but in this case, you need to count the number of items or nodes in this case. Another solution could be static queries. So, for example, if you are doing an API, a GraphQL API that's just for you, just for your application, you can collect all your queries that you're doing in the front end, and you can, for example, you can have an identifier in the backend, and you can say only this query can be done on this API, which is quite nice actually, because you can also optimize the queries. For example, instead of sending your JSON like something like this, you can just send the identifier with the variables, so you send less data to the user. And this is something that Facebook is doing as well, and because they have so many users that even 1 kilobytes, it's much it's much better than doing more data. Another problem is caching. Basically, you're doing post requests, so you cannot really have transparent cache on top of it. And one of solution that they say, oh, you should cache data on the front end, but still, it's not the best solution, because you can have many clients, and caching on the front end it's going to be helpful, because still you prevent to do query for each page, for example, if they refresh, but still it's going to be problematic if you have loads of information and source. So one solution could be there is another pattern which is called data loader, which is basically just an API where you can say, oh, I need this information, and if this information is already in the cache, it's going to return it from the cache. Otherwise, it's going to do all the operation. It's going to call the database. It's going to call another API. So that's more or less an introduction on GraphQL. Why should you use it? I think it's quite cool to use GraphQL because for me, it solves me loads of trouble with front-end developers, because every time I do an API, I need to document it, and it's really time-consuming, because you have to document every fields, every stuff. So with GraphQL, you just do it. It's done. The documentation is done for you. You can also add some other description, but basically the basic documentation is done. They don't have to read a Swagger file or something like that. And also, if you have a complex application like Coursera, which I was reading another article for them, that they are switching to GraphQL. They have more than 1,000 endpoints, which is crazy. Especially if you're hiring new developers, it's really a pain to get them knowledgeable with your own infrastructure. So is there any question? Thank you.
It's almost break time, but we've got time for 1 or 2 questions, I think.
You can shout.
Romantic battery or something.
Sorry.
Okay.
Uh,
Go for it.
I saw in some of the different queries the arguments passed in brackets. I think they're arguments.
So let me show you again this one.
Sometimes it looks like they're being used rather like how I do a filter in Django ORM. Sometimes it looks like they're being used for updating maybe, and sometimes for like specifying return type or something. Is that right? Or does GraphQL put any semantics on what those should be?
All right. No, there's no semantics. There is some kind of extension for example, for pagination, which is called relay. I mean, relay is also a client for like frontend client, but you also have like relay nodes where you can. There is like standard way to specify pagination, but no, you can use this one for doing mutation or doing filtering or specifying different outputs. So there's no.
Is it entirely up to you on the back end how you interpret those arguments then?
Yes.
Right.
The subscription model, how does it work internally? Like, which protocol is it using to push the changes to the client?
It's using WebSockets. I'm probably going to put the code online because it's something a bit new. It's going to be on my Twitter. So. Any other question? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.